There is a question people rarely ask out loud. If someone kills once, will they kill again? The law does not answer that question. It cannot. A sentence can measure punishment. A prison can confine a body. A court can close a case. None of those things can see into the future. Most people want to believe that violence is an aberration, a rupture, an exception, something that can be contained and corrected, that once confronted, it does not return. But history is uneven. Some acts of violence stand alone, others do not. For families who have buried someone, that uncertainty is not intellectual, it is intimate. It lingers long after the verdict. It follows every headline about release, every quiet return to ordinary life. In a small Pennsylvania town in late June of 2010, that question would stop being abstract. The day began the way summer days do. Screen doors opened and shut. Neighbors lingered outside, unhurried. Inside one twin home, 3 generations moved through familiar routines. Next door, a married couple debated whether to take their boat out or stay in and finish a movie. They stayed. By the end of the afternoon, 4 people would be dead. The violence would be described as shocking, sudden, unthinkable. But it was not without history. The man responsible had killed before. He had faced the system. He had served his time. He had been released back into the world. And on that Saturday, the question no one can answer in advance was answered. When fear crossed a threshold that day, someone else crossed it too. Without shoes. Without hesitation. Without knowing that he was stepping into a story that had already begun years earlier. This is the story of what happened inside that house, and of what justice can and cannot prevent. You're listening to Departed in Pennsyltucky, 43, 15, 8, 29, Part 1, The Case of Denise Merhi, Dennis Marsh, Alvin Marsh, and Steven Zernhelt. Chapter 1, What Remains. The room was quiet, in the way only formal ceremonies are quiet. Soft, clinks of silverware, low murmurs, the rustle of programs. At the front, Janet Zernhelt stood alone. In her hands was a bronze medal awarded by the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission, one of the highest civilian honors for heroism in the United States. Her husband's name was engraved on it, Steven Zernhelt. The citation described his act in simple, restrained language. He had entered a neighboring home after learning someone inside was in danger, confronted a violent attacker, and tried to help. It did not describe the 35 years leading up to that moment. It did not describe the high school job where he and Janet met, working side by side in paper hats and grease-stained aprons. It did not describe the way he mowed the lawn in straight, careful lines, or how he checked the doors twice every night, or how he was weeks away from celebrating his 35th wedding anniversary. Awards condense a life into a paragraph. Janet knew the rest of the story. Justice moved slowly. Honor did not. The Carnegie Hero Medal was small enough to fit in her palm, but heavy enough to change her life forever. Steve had done precisely what it represented. In his final moments, he ran towards danger, not away from it. The medal acknowledged what Janet and their family already knew. Steve was the kind of man who would give the shirt off his back, a protector by instinct, a hero by action. When Janet received it, she wept. She thanked the Pennsylvania State Police in Bethlehem for nominating her husband and for ensuring his courage would not be forgotten. Everyone in that room understood something unspeakable. This medal existed because Steven had run towards danger, and he never came home. Chapter 2. The Sound Before the Screams. Northampton, Pennsylvania, sits just 7 miles north of Allentown, tucked into the Lehigh Valley like a town that time agreed not to hurry. Fewer than 10,000 people live here. Neighbors wave from porches. Doors are left unlocked a little longer than they should be. It is the kind of place that believes it is safe. On the 900 block of Lincoln Street, houses rise neatly from the pavement. Brick porches squared to the road. Tidy lawns clipped close. Flower boxes spilling over with impatient bursts of summer color. At the crest of the small grassy hill stood 1917 Lincoln Street, a modest double home with tan siding and white trim windows. Nothing about it suggested violence. Nothing hinted at what would be unfolding inside. Denise Merhi lived there with her 2 children, Annika and Tristan, along with her father Dennis and her grandfather Alvin. Recently divorced, Denise was rebuilding her life one steady step at a time. She was warm in a way that felt effortless, bubbly, quick to laugh, high-spirited without trying too hard. People gravitated towards her. She listened. She remembered the details. She showed up. As a medical assistant, she balanced long shifts with the unglamorous choreography of motherhood, birthdays, ball games, school concerts, and homework at the kitchen table. She was present in the lives of the people she loved, and they leaned on her in return. Next door, at 1915 Lincoln Street, lived Steven and Janet Zernhelt. They had been part of the neighborhood for decades. Their home and their stable routines were a backdrop to the quiet suburban street. Though the Zernhelts and Denise were not especially close, Janet had known of the family long before moving there, having attended high school with Denise's aunt in nearby North Catasauqua. Steven and Janet had shared 34 years of marriage, raising 3 children and building a life filled with quiet routines, love, and loyalty, just 1 month shy of their 35th anniversary. High school sweethearts. They had met while working side by side at a local fast food restaurant, quickly becoming inseparable. Steve, a devoted father and husband, taught heating and air conditioning, a steady practical profession that reflected his dependable problem-solving nature. Janet, ever observant and caring, had been his partner in every sense, creating a home where family and neighbors alike felt welcome and protected. Growing up, Steve always tried to resolve situations. He was the diplomatic family member, the one who would always try to get everyone to get along. Even in small moments, he had a quiet instinct to step forward when something felt wrong, to protect others before thinking twice. That Saturday, June 25th, 2010, Northampton sweltered under the thick, sticky heat and humidity of a typical Pennsylvania summer. Days like this usually didn't stop anyone. Locals were used to hot afternoons, sweat-soaked commutes, and playgrounds that seemed to steam in the sun. But for Denise, the burn she had gotten just 2 days earlier at the Jersey Shore made the outdoors unbearable. She and her close friend, Debbie Hawkey, had taken both of their children on a short family trip to celebrate Denise's daughter's birthday, a day filled with laughter, boardwalk rides, and ice cream cones that melted too easily in the hot sun. Normally, a graduation party at a nearby park would have been no deterrent for her, but this time, the pain of the sunburn kept Denise home. By mid-afternoon, Denise's house was quiet, deceptively ordinary. The rhythmic hum of ceiling fans and the faint scent of sunscreen still hung in the air, masking the tension about to erupt. Around the same time on that thick, humid Saturday afternoon, Janet and Steve were relaxing at home, watching a movie. They had planned to take their boat to Beltsville Lake, about 20 miles north of town, but decided instead to stay in and enjoy a quiet day together. Then, they heard a scream from next door. It was loud, sharp, and distressed. Steve immediately assumed someone had been hurt, possibly Alvin, Denise's 85-year-old grandfather. Months earlier, Janet had heard Denise scream before when Alvin had fallen outside, and they wondered if something similar had happened again. Steven stepped onto the porch next door and knocked on Denise's front door. When no one answered, he walked around toward the back of the house, expecting to find someone outside. Both Denise's and Dennis's cars were parked nearby, yet the yard was empty. Puzzled, Steve returned home, and the couple resumed their movie. Later that afternoon, around 4:45 p.m., Debbie arrived to retrieve her van. Denise's own car was in the shop, and Debbie had lent her the vehicle temporarily. Denise had promised to leave the keys in the mailbox, but when Debbie checked, they weren't there. It was supposed to be a routine stop. Debbie called out as she entered, her voice casual, familiar, the kind of voice used in a house visited many times before. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Keys rested on the dining room table. Her purse was set nearby. Then came a faint noise from the kitchen, a subtle rustling, of movement that suggested she wasn't alone. Expecting to hear Denise answer, Debbie stepped towards the kitchen. Instead, there was silence. So absolute, it felt wrong. Denise lay on the floor, submerged in a pool of blood. For a suspended moment, Debbie's mind refused to comprehend what she was seeing. It tried to reimagine it. Denise had fallen, fainted, suffered some accident. But the blood left no room for denial. It spread across the floor with the deliberate chaos only violence can leave behind. Panicked, Debbie ran outside, her feet pounding the hot summer pavement. As she did, a neighbor across the street caught a movement out of the corner of their eye. A man, shirtless and covered in blood, had sprinted from Denise's porch into the street, sliding into a car parked nearby. It was a Pontiac Grand Prix, Denise's own vehicle, and it roared down the street in a blur of tires squealing and metal scraping the asphalt. Steve and Janet were in the middle of watching their movie when they heard more screams, followed by frantic pounding at their front door. Debbie burst inside, wild-eyed and trembling, clutching a cell phone, urging them to call 911 because there was blood everywhere next door. Without hesitation, Stephen vaulted over the small brick divider between the porches and sprinted toward Denise's house, barefoot, the summer pavement burning beneath his feet. Janet called after him, reminding him that he was barefoot, but Stephen was already gone, driven by urgency and instinct. Janet grabbed the phone and dialed 911, while Debbie paced nearby, wringing her hands. Through the line, Janet could hear faint, muffled noises next door. Shifts of weight, echoes of chaos, the unmistakable sounds of a struggle. Minutes passed. The police had not yet arrived. Janet's fear deepened. Unable to leave Stephen alone, she searched the pantry for anything she could use to defend herself. Finding nothing, she crossed the threshold into Denise's home. Inside, she froze. Stephen lay in a pool of blood, motionless. Shock washed over her, numbing her body and mind. Janet and Debbie retreated to the Zernhelt's home and locked the doors. Outside, the neighborhood remained oblivious to the horror that erupted next door. What had begun as an ordinary summer afternoon had become a crime scene. A home once filled with laughter and routine now held echoes of unimaginable violence. Steven Zernhelt never came back, and Northampton would never feel safe again. Chapter 3: Blood on Lincoln Street. By 5 p.m., Northampton police arrived at 1917 Lincoln Street. The front yard was chaos, neighbors shouting, panicked voices carried throughout the humid air, the heat making every shout and sound jagged and strained. Janet, nearly hysterical, pointed to the open door, insisting her husband Stephen was still inside, gravely injured. Officers ordered everyone to stay put. A trail of crimson droplets led from the threshold to the porch, silent markers of the horror within. Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet, broken only by the faint hum of a TV left running in the living room. The smell of blood was thick, metallic, and clinging to everything, hanging in the oppressive summer air like a suffocating fog. Steven Zernhelt lay crouched on his side, blood pooling around him, his hands folded, his face a grotesque mask of stab wounds, his left thumb severed. Children's toys were scattered nearby, sticky with blood, innocence corrupted. A trail of blood led to the kitchen, where Denise Merhi lay on her back, soaked in blood, arms and legs spread wide, dozens of stab wounds scarring her body. Her tattoos, a rose on her ankle, a dragonfly on her foot, stood out in the stark contrast to the violence. Blood streaked down the cabinets above her, footprints pressed into the floor, the hardwood sticky underfoot. In a side room, Alvin Marsh, Denise's grandfather, sat slumped in his wheelchair. His neck was slashed wide, blood pouring like a waterfall onto his gray t-shirt and the carpet beneath. The lifeline alarm hung uselessly from his chest, incapable of summoning help. His left middle finger was shredded, a desperate defense rendered meaningless. Downstairs, Dennis Marsh lay in the basement apartment. A white quilt covered him, but one arm and hand protruded into a dying pool of blood. Multiple stab wounds crisscrossed his body. Tattoos, a Mickey Mouse, Jim Morrison, a nude woman, and a butterfly stood in grim contrast to the carnage. A medic alert tag revealed diabetes, highlighting his vulnerability. Nearby, a folded Superman t-shirt rested on a plaid armchair, a patch of blood staining the iconic red S. Placed with care, deliberation, and eerie effect, the shirt added a grotesque signature to the scene. And lastly, detectives found a chilling message. Denise is a whore was scrawled in blood with sharp, deliberate strokes. Dispatchers confirmed the officer's worst fears: multiple homicide victims, 4 people, 1 house, a neighborhood shattered in minutes. Thoughts immediately turned to Denise's children, Tristan and Annika, thankfully away at the Jersey Shore, still celebrating Annika's birthday. The gruesome scene underscored the cold certainty that had the children been home, they too would have been targeted. A quadruple homicide had disturbed the rhythm of a quiet Northampton street. Detectives moved through the rooms. Neighbors hovered at the edges, all haunted by the unthinkable violence. 4 dead, 1 house. A community left reeling. Lincoln Street, once ordinary and unremarkable, had been marked forever. The summer air hung heavy, sticky, and suffocating over the neighborhood. a lingering reminder of the terror unleashed that day. The city of Northampton would never feel safe again. Chapter 4: The Aftermath. The heat and humidity of that Pennsylvania summer still pressed down on Lincoln Street as first responders secured the scene. Inside 1917 Lincoln Street, 4 lives had been violently extinguished. Outside, the cicadas hummed, indifferent, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath everyone's feet. Less than 10 minutes after the attack, the ripple of violence spread beyond Northampton. A car, a Pontiac Grand Prix, swerved violently along Route 329 in Allen Township, skidding across the hot asphalt and crashing into a tree. The driver lay unconscious, shirtless, jeans soaked in blood. At first glance, it seemed like a reckless accident. But the timing, the blood, and the stolen vehicle suggested something far more sinister than a simple crash. An off-duty state police trooper driving home rushed to the scene. He leaned over the man, trying to assess his condition, asking for his name and where he had come from. The man stirred, his eyes flickering open, and in a calm, almost casual tone, he revealed that he just killed everyone. His words hung in the humid air, ambiguous and chilling. He offered no explanation beyond his own simple, detached confession. Medics tended to his extensive leg injuries, noting a knife sheath dangling from his belt, but the meaning remained unclear. Panic, delusion, or confession, there was no way to know. He was transported to the hospital, where the unease deepened. Doctors stitched cuts, cleaned bruises, and attended to abrasions while he spoke freely, almost attached, admitting that he had killed his girlfriend, her family, and a neighbor. When asked about the injury to his knee, he explained matter-of-factly that it happened during the act itself, the knife slipping in the struggle. Even as medics worked, he remained calm, eerily composed, offering to sign papers, to plead guilty, to accept full responsibility, and coldly blaming the parole board for his predicament. He recounted a brutal quadruple homicide with the air of someone describing a routine errand, not as an act of mass violence. It was only then that authorities learned his identity: Michael Ballard, a recently released parolee who had served nearly 15 years for a 1992 murder. The stolen car, the blood, and his chillingly calm admission, moments after the Lincoln Street massacre, cast the events in a darker, deliberate light. Questions stretched far beyond the doors of 1917 Lincoln Street. Authorities had questions. The community had fear. And the answers, they realized, would not come easily. Even more disturbing was the truth of Michael Ballard's recent past. A man who had already taken a life, served his sentence, and been allowed back into society. The very system that had once locked him away had returned him to the world, and in a matter of hours, 4 more lives were gone. Justice, if it had any meaning, seemed to arrive too late. The people of Northampton were left with a stark realization. Some dangers could never be fully anticipated, and some individuals, no matter the warnings, would stop at nothing. The terror on Lincoln Street was not just a crime scene. It was a haunting reminder of what can happen when violence, obsession, and opportunity collide. Chapter 5. The Past Returns. On a chilly night in Allentown, Pennsylvania, March 14, 1992, Donald Richard never heard the knock at the door that would end his life. By the time he realized the danger, Michael Ballard was already inside. The apartment smelled faintly of old carpet and cigarette smoke. Then the chaos began. Quick, sharp, brutal. 13 times, Michael Ballard's knife found its mark. Each strike was more precise than the last, each one fueled by a fury that made no sense, that could not be reasoned with. Richard tried to fight back, tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the walls. The young man was relentless, a storm of rage with cold, hard eyes. When it was over, Donald Richard lay slumped on his own couch, blood pooling around him, the room silent except for the ragged rhythm of his fading heartbeat. His wallet was gone. His car was gone. His life had been stolen, taken by a man who would show no remorse. The world would later learn the name behind the terror: Michael Ballard. 19 years old at the time, he fled to Arkansas with the stolen items. The murder weapon borrowed from a friend as easily as borrowing a book. Police would catch him 2 days later, but the nightmare he began would not end there. Investigators uncovered unsettling truths about Michael Ballard. He had ties to the Ku Klux Klan. Though the Klan had no hand in Donald Richard's death, it revealed a man whose hatred ran deep, a man capable of violence without conscience. He distributed Klan literature, tried to recruit others, and when confronted, showed no remorse. In court, Michael Ballard claimed self-defense, alleging unwanted sexual advances during his visit to Donald Richard's apartment. But Donald's wounds screamed a different story. When he faced Donald Richard's family, hands on his hips, eyes cold and unyielding, he said he owed them nothing. Gloria Sieber, Donald's sister, knew in that instant, some people cannot be changed. Some people are monsters. And yet, the system allowed Michael Ballard back into the world. Sentenced to 15 to 30 years, he walked free in November of 2006, just 15 years later, 3 weeks shy of parole eligibility. A halfway house, work release privileges, errands unmonitored. Freedom for a man who had already taken a life. By the time Michael Ballard returned to Pennsylvania, the warning signs were unmistakable. He was unpredictable, ruthless, capable of far more. In March 2007, his past would collide with Northampton. The same man who had murdered Donald Richard would soon enter Denise Merhi's life 15 years of unchecked violence that had festered in the shadows, ready to erupt. The community would be left shattered. The past had returned, bringing death with it. This concludes this week's episode of Departed in Pennsyltucky. I'm your host, Andrea Dudak. Tune in next week for more true crime talk without the Valley Girl squawk.